The silent scream, Clara's journey from darkness to light. What if I told you that a 7-year-old child voluntarily pushed razor-sharp fragments beneath her tiny fingernails? Not once, but dozens of times? And when doctors desperately asked her why, her whispered response would shatter your heart into a million pieces. So mommy won't get hurt anymore. Hold on to that feeling gripping your chest right now, because what you're about to hear isn't just another story. It's a testament to the unbreakable spirit of childhood, the devastating power of silence, and the miraculous strength found in the most unexpected places. This is Clara's story, and it will change how you see courage forever. Picture this. It's a crisp October morning in Lincoln, Illinois. The kind of morning where autumn paints the world in burnt orange and golden yellow, where children's laughter should echo through school hallways like music. But in classroom 2B of Lincoln Elementary, there's a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. 23 energetic second graders are buzzing with excitement. It's arts and crafts time, that magical hour when imagination runs wild and creativity knows no bounds. Crayons scratch across paper, scissors snip through construction sheets, and giggles bubble up like champagne. But in the very back corner, by the window where morning light should bring warmth, sits a little girl who seems to exist in her own shadow. Clara Smith. 7 years old. Hair that always looks like she's been running through wind, even though she never runs. A sweater with threads unraveling at the hem, as if even her clothes are coming undone. She sits hunched over her desk, shoulders curved inward like she's trying to disappear into herself. Her hands are hidden beneath the desk, clutched against her body like precious secrets. Now, Mrs. Martha Lewis has been teaching for over 2 decades. She's seen every type of child imaginable. The rebels who throw tantrums, the crybabies who wail over paper cuts, the shy ones who take weeks to warm up. But Clara is different. She's not crying, not acting out, not even particularly sad-looking. She's just absent. Like her soul packed up and moved out while her body stayed behind. For 2 solid weeks, Clara hasn't participated in a single classroom activity. Not when they painted jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween. Not during story time when the other kids gasped and giggled at fairy tales. Not even during recess, that sacred time when children transform into wild creatures of joy and chaos. She simply remains frozen in place, as if the world beyond her desk doesn't exist. Martha pretends to help another student with their paper tiger, but her eyes keep drifting back to Clara. There's something about the child's stillness that makes her skin crawl. Not in a scary way, but in the way your heart recognizes danger before your mind does. It's like watching someone drowning in plain sight while everyone else sees perfectly calm water. Then it happens. A crayon rolls off Clara's desk and hits the floor with the softest little tap. Clara leans forward to pick it up, and for just a split second, her left hand emerges from its hiding place. Martha's eyes lock onto that tiny hand like a heat-seeking missile, and what she sees makes her blood turn to ice. Dark red rings around Clara's fingernails. Not like when you accidentally catch your nail in a door. Not like a paper cut or a scraped knee. This looks deliberate. Infected. Like someone took a razor blade and carefully, methodically, carved away at those tiny nail beds until they wept blood and pus. Martha's breath catches in her throat. She tells herself not to jump to conclusions, not to assume the worst. But deep in her gut, that primal instinct that every teacher develops after years of protecting children starts screaming. Something is very, very wrong. She approaches Clara's desk like she's approaching a wounded animal, moving slowly, keeping her voice soft. "Clara," she whispers, kneeling down so she's at eye level. "Are your hands hurting today?" Clara doesn't speak. Doesn't even look up. Just shakes her head in the tiniest motion, like even that small movement might shatter something fragile inside her. "Can I take a look? Just to make sure you're okay?" Now Clara reacts. She yanks both hands back under the desk and presses herself against her chair like Martha just asked to see her deepest, darkest secret. Her breathing becomes fast and shallow, like someone preparing for something terrible to happen. The school bell rings. 22 children explode into motion, racing for the playground like prisoners granted freedom. But Clara doesn't move. She sits there staring at her shoes, trapped in whatever invisible cage holds her captive. Martha steps into the hallway, her heart pounding so hard she can hear it in her ears. She spots Michael, the PE teacher, wiping sweat from his forehead after wrestling with a particularly energetic group of second graders. "She's not outside again, is she?" he asks, glancing toward the classroom. "No," Martha replies, her voice tight. "She hasn't been for weeks." Michael's expression grows serious. The other kids are starting to whisper. Yesterday, one of them called her weird. "Did you hear how she reacted?" Martha nods, her jaw clenching. She had heard. But what broke her heart wasn't the cruel word itself. It was Clara's response. No tears. No protests. No anger. Just acceptance, like she'd been called much worse things and learned not to expect anything different. Later that afternoon, during math practice, Clara's pencil slips off her desk again. As she bends to retrieve it, her hand brushes against the table edge, and her sweater sleeve pulls back. This time, Martha gets a clear view of the dried blood crusted around Clara's ring finger. The skin looks angry and swollen, with faint yellow pus gathering at the edges. When the final bell rings, Martha intends to keep Clara back for a gentle conversation. But before she can act, a woman appears in the doorway. Isabel Smith, Clara's mother. She stands with her arms crossed, impatience radiating from her like heat waves. "I can't stay long," Isabel says curtly. "I've got night shift." "Miss Smith," Martha begins carefully, "I'd really appreciate just a few minutes to talk. Clara hasn't been herself lately. I'm concerned about—" "She's always been sensitive," Isabel interrupts, her tone sharp as broken glass. "Overly emotional. Doesn't like crowds. You know how some kids are." Martha takes a breath, choosing her words like she's defusing a bomb. "I think it might be more than that. There's something— I know my daughter better than anyone," Isabel snaps, her jaw tightening. "She's just shy. Always has been." She takes Clara's hand, and Martha watches the child flinch like she's been burned. In that split second, Martha sees everything she needs to see in Clara's face. Behind those pale, hollow eyes lurks a fear so deep and ancient it makes her stomach turn. This isn't the fear of a pop quiz or getting in trouble at school. This is the bone-deep terror of someone who knows they're not safe, and that no one can hear their silent screams for help. That night, Martha sits at her kitchen table, staring at a blank lesson plan that might as well be written in invisible ink. All she can think about is the slight tremor in Clara's breathing when she asked to see her hands. The way the child recoiled from even the gentlest touch. The crushing weight of that silence stretching between them like an ocean of unspoken pain. Somewhere in that silence, Martha makes a decision that will change everything. The next morning arrives wrapped in fog so thick it seems to muffle the very air. Martha stands by the school entrance, clipboard in hand, but her mind is galaxies away from attendance sheets and daily routines. She scans the sidewalk beyond the fence like a sentinel watching for approaching danger. Then she sees them. Isabel moves with the brisk, mechanical steps of someone running late for everything. She wears a coal-black coat that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, her hair pinned back with military precision. In one hand, she clutches a travel mug like a lifeline. In the other, she grips the wrist of a child who seems too fragile for such forceful handling. Even from a distance, Clara's walk tells a story of defeat. Her steps are tiny and hesitant, like she's walking across thin ice that might crack at any moment. She wears the same pale blue sweater as yesterday, sleeves pulled down over her hands like armor. Her gaze stays locked on the sidewalk cracks, as if memorizing every line is the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Martha intercepts them before they reach the door. "Good morning," she says, keeping her voice gentle but determined. Isabel barely acknowledges her with a curt nod. "I'm in a hurry." "I was hoping we could find time to talk," Martha presses on, her tone careful as a surgeon's scalpel. "Just 5 minutes. I've been noticing some concerning patterns with Clara. She's withdrawn, not engaging. I believe it's important that we—" "She's always been this way," Isabel cuts in, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Introverted. Sensitive. She doesn't like noisy places or loud people. Some kids are just quiet, Ms. Lewis. It's not a crime." "No, of course not," Martha replies, standing her ground like a lighthouse in a storm. "But there's more. She's hiding her hands. She flinches when touched. I've seen signs that suggest— signs." Isabel's voice rises an octave, sharp enough to cut glass. You think you're a doctor now? Martha feels her heart hammering against her ribs, but she doesn't back down. No. But I'm her teacher, and I care about her. The pause that follows lasts only seconds, but it contains volumes of unspoken truth. Isabel stares past Martha, her jaw tight as a steel trap, lips pressed into a thin white line. She checks her watch with the practiced motion of someone always running from something. I work nights. I barely sleep. I don't have time for school gossip. I'd like to schedule a home visit, Martha continues, softening her voice like she's approaching a cornered animal. Isabel's response comes swift and final as a slamming door. There's no need. I know my daughter. She turns, tugging Clara's arm with gentle but firm insistence. Clara stumbles slightly, and for just a heartbeat, their eyes meet, Martha's and the child's. It's a fleeting connection, lasting less than a blink, but in that moment Martha sees something that stops her breath cold. Not just fear. Guilt. It flickers across Clara's face like shadow and flame, deep and old, like she's carried this burden since before she learned to tie her shoes. Like she believes, with every fiber of her 7-year-old being, that whatever's happening to her is somehow her fault. Then she's gone, her small frame disappearing through the heavy entrance doors like smoke dissolving in wind. Martha stands frozen as the fog swirls around her ankles, wrapping her legs like ghostly fingers. There's something unbearable about this moment, the crushing knowledge that something is desperately wrong, combined with the helpless feeling of watching through bulletproof glass while a child drowns in silence. Later that morning, during her planning period, Martha sits at her desk staring at a blank form titled Student Wellness Referral. Her pen hovers above the paper like a bird afraid to land. She's seen bruises before, witnessed neglect, reported malnourishment. But this feels different. More insidious. More carefully hidden. There are no screaming arguments, no visible wounds, no obvious signs of abuse. Only silence. And in that silence, something dark and terrible is growing, fed by fear and nurtured by shame. Martha thinks about Clara's hands again, the way she pulled them back like they were made of glass, the faint crust of infection around her nails, the way her entire body recoiled at even the suggestion of help. Her mind keeps circling back to one central heartbreaking truth. Whatever Clara is hiding, she's been taught to fear its discovery more than the pain itself. The classroom smells like childhood, that distinctive blend of glue sticks, construction paper, and the lingering traces of 23 different lunchboxes. It's craft period again, and the students of Room 2B are cutting shapes for a paper animal parade that will later march across the hallway bulletin board. Colored paper lies scattered across desks like confetti after a celebration. At Clara's desk, however, there's no celebration. No activity. No life. She sits motionless as a statue, small hands buried beneath her sweater sleeves, scissors untouched beside her like abandoned surgical instruments. Her eyes aren't focused on the instructions or the materials spread before her. They're fixed on something distant and invisible, someplace far beyond these beige walls where perhaps pain doesn't live and silence doesn't rule. Martha moves from group to group, offering encouragement and praise, her voice bright as Christmas morning. But as she approaches Clara's desk, her steps slow like she's walking through quicksand. She lowers herself carefully, trying not to intrude but to invite. "Would you like to try making a paper fox?" she asks, her voice soft as feathers. Clara doesn't speak, doesn't acknowledge the question. But slowly, like someone moving underwater, she reaches forward and pulls the scissors toward herself. She holds them in her right hand, her grip awkward and uncertain, like the tool belongs to someone else entirely. Then it happens. With a sudden slip that seems almost inevitable in hindsight, the blades slice across the middle of her index finger. Time hiccups. For a split second, nothing happens. The world holds its breath. Then comes the blood, vivid, sharp red that wells up along the cut like a crimson flower blooming in fast forward. It pools and runs down her fingertip, soaking the corner of the paper fox she hadn't even started creating. But what freezes Martha's soul isn't the wound itself. It's Clara's face. She doesn't scream, doesn't gasp, doesn't even flinch. Her expression remains flat and unmoved, as though the injury is nothing more than a passing shadow. Her eyes flutter briefly but don't focus, like her mind has learned to step outside her body during moments of pain. She uses her other hand, equally hesitant, equally trembling, to cover the cut, pressing down as if hiding the damage is more important than stopping the bleeding. as if she's been trained to conceal pain rather than seek help for it. A shriek erupts from across the room. "Miss Martha! Clara's bleeding!" Chaos explodes like a burst dam. Children scramble back from their desks. One girl drops her scissors with a clatter. A boy stands on his chair to get a better view. The classroom fills with frightened whispers and wide, darting eyes. Martha snaps into emergency mode. "Michael!" she shouts toward the hallway. "Call Nurse Lucy." No. Within moments, Nurse Lucy arrives with her emergency kit, moving with the swift precision of a battlefield medic. She kneels beside Clara like she's approaching something precious and breakable, her gloved hands working with gentle efficiency as she peels Clara's small hand away from the wound. Her professional composure falters. Her brow furrows as she examines not just the fresh cut, but the angry, inflamed skin around Clara's nails. Puffy red crescents ring each fingertip, and faint yellow pus oozes from the corner of her pinky. Under the clear ridge of her thumbnail, something hard and foreign glints in the fluorescent light. "Clara," Lucy murmurs, her voice filled with a mixture of professional concern and maternal horror. "Sweetheart, what's happened to your hands?" Lucy's hands pause in their work. "There's something hard under her nail," she says, almost to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to take her to the health room." Clara doesn't resist, doesn't cry or flinch or protest. She simply allows herself to be led from the classroom like a broken doll, silent and limp, her eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. Martha follows, her heart hammering so loud she can barely hear the echo of their footsteps in the corridor. In the small, sterile health room, Clara sits on the padded exam bed, her legs dangling too short to reach the floor. Her hands lie in her lap, hastily bandaged, but already the white cloth is blooming with new crimson flowers. Lucy cleans the wound again, her movements gentle but thorough. As she begins to unwrap one of the older bandages, Clara suddenly recoils like she's been electrocuted. "No," she whispers, her voice barely audible, like wind through a keyhole. Don't look." Her breathing becomes fast and shallow, her chest rising in frightened little jumps. Martha steps closer, lowering her voice to something barely above a hum. "It's okay, Clara. I'm here. No one's going to hurt you. We want to help, but we have to see." Clara shakes her head, and a single tear slides down her cheek like liquid silver. That's when Martha sees it, sees what's been hiding behind the silence all along. It's not just fear painting Clara's features. It's shame. Deep, crushing shame that no 7-year-old should ever carry. A child, ashamed of being hurt. Ashamed of her own wounds. What kind of darkness had Clara been living in? What kind of pain had been dressed up and presented as normal? Martha's chest tightens as the horrible truth begins to crystallize. The silence Clara lived in wasn't just quiet, it was a prison built from fear and maintained by shame. And somehow, this little girl had been convinced that her pain was her fault, her responsibility, her secret to keep. That evening, as the school empties and shadows grow long, Martha joins Lucy and Principal Anderson in the main office. The fluorescent lights hum softly overhead, casting everything in harsh, clinical white. Papers scatter across desks like fallen leaves, but no one's paying attention to paperwork tonight. "These injuries," Lucy says, her voice subdued as prayer, "didn't happen today." She holds up Clara's file, pointing to photographs that make Martha's stomach clench. Her fingers show signs of long-term infection. Multiple episodes. And there's definitely something embedded under her nails. Could be glass. Could be plastic. Could be. She doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. The room falls silent except for the distant hum of the building's heating system. Martha feels the words forming in her throat like stones. "That's not an accident," she whispers. Principal Anderson nods grimly, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the authorities. The ambulance isn't what you'd expect. No blaring sirens painting the air red and blue. No urgent voices shouting medical jargon. Just a quiet white vehicle, unmarked and unassuming, pulling gently to a stop in front of Lincoln Elementary like it's making a routine delivery. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the pavement, and the few remaining teachers watch from behind curtains and doorways, their faces painted with confusion and concern. No one knows quite what to say or think when childhood innocence collides with adult horror. Inside the school's main office, Clara sits on the nurse's cot, her small frame barely making an indentation in the thin mattress. She doesn't look around, doesn't ask questions, doesn't show any of the curiosity that should define a 7-year-old. She simply stares at the floor near her feet with that same unbroken gaze that's been unsettling Martha for weeks. Nurse Lucy stands nearby, her hands folded tightly in front of her like she's praying. Martha sits beside Clara, one hand resting gently on the edge of the bed, not touching the child, not forcing closeness, but present. Grounding. A lighthouse in the storm. The paramedic who enters speaks like he's in a library, afraid a louder tone might shatter something precious and irreparable. "We're ready to take her now," he says softly. Clara doesn't react. It's Martha who helps her stand, who guides her slowly down the hallway and out the door, past curious eyes and whispered conversations, into the subdued interior of the ambulance. Lucy climbs in behind them, her professional mask firmly in place, but Martha can see the cracks around the edges. The drive to Chicago Children's Hospital takes less than an hour, but time moves differently inside that vehicle. The hum of tires on asphalt, the occasional murmur from the front seat, the soft beep of monitoring equipment, it all blurs into a kind of suspended animation. Clara sits between the two women, her hands wrapped in fresh gauze, her shoulders curved inward like she's trying to fold herself into invisibility. Martha glances at her several times during the journey, but doesn't speak. What words could possibly bridge the gap between a child's pain and an adult's understanding? What promises could she make that wouldn't sound hollow against the backdrop of what they'd discovered? At the hospital, the fluorescent lights of the ER are bright but not harsh, designed to heal rather than interrogate. A nurse meets them at the door with a clipboard, asking for names and dates and details that reduce Clara's suffering to bureaucratic checkboxes. She's registered under Trauma Observation, Minor. Possible embedded foreign object. But the clinical language feels sterile and detached compared to the quiet devastation they've all witnessed. Dr. Lewis Roberts arrives moments later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that speak of decades spent tending to broken children. Not just their bodies, but their spirits. He doesn't greet Clara with the forced cheer of someone trying to coax smiles from shadows. Instead, he kneels to her level and looks at her like she's the only person in the entire hospital. "My name is Dr. Roberts," he says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of genuine care. "You're safe here. I just want to take a look at your hands. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. Just sit with me for a bit." Clara blinks once, then twice. She doesn't nod, but she doesn't pull away either. And in that small absence of resistance, Martha realizes they've witnessed something extraordinary. A child who has every reason to distrust adults choosing, in the smallest possible way, to trust. The exam room is small and clean, filled with that particular silence that hospitals seem to specialize in. Clara sits on the low bed, her feet dangling in space, while Dr. Roberts rolls a small instrument tray closer. The tools lined up there look like they belong in a jewelry store rather than a medical facility. Tiny, precise, designed for delicate work. A second-year resident named Dr. Agnes enters quietly, greeting Clara with nothing more than a gentle smile and a nod. Sometimes the most powerful communication happens without words. Dr. Roberts begins unwrapping the gauze on Clara's left hand, layer by layer, like an archaeologist uncovering ancient artifacts. The blood-stained fabric gives way to reveal fingers that look like they've been through a war. The skin around her nails is swollen and discolored, torn and infected. Some areas show signs of multiple healing episodes, old wounds trying to mend while new ones are inflicted. Dr. Agnes reaches for a magnifying glass, and Dr. Roberts points to Clara's pinky finger. "Right here," he murmurs, his gloved fingers pausing. "Something's catching the light." He selects a pair of tweezers designed for microsurgery, the kind used to remove splinters smaller than rice grains. Ever so slowly, he lifts Clara's nail slightly, and what he finds makes both doctors inhale sharply. Clara's lips part, but she doesn't cry, doesn't flinch. She only trembles, not from physical pain, but from the memory of it. From the weight of secrets finally being exposed to light. Beneath the nail is a sliver of glass, no longer than a grain of rice, perfectly wedged and clearly old. The tissue around it has tried to heal, growing over the foreign object like skin trying to swallow something that doesn't belong. Dr. Agnes's voice comes out barely above a whisper. "That didn't just happen." "No," Dr. Roberts replies, his tone grim as winter. It didn't. Another fingertip reveals something similar, a piece of hard plastic, almost translucent, curved to match the shape of the nail bed. Some fragments show signs of early decomposition. Others are so deeply embedded that Clara's own tissue has begun growing around them, her body trying desperately to adapt to pain that should never have been inflicted. Lucy stands frozen near the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth. Martha sits in rigid silence, gripping her own fingers to stop them from shaking. Through it all, Clara remains eerily still, her eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles like she's learned to leave her body during moments like these. When the examination of the second hand begins, it's worse. Much worse. 12 pieces in total, glass, plastic, thin metal fragments, each one a tiny monument to systematic cruelty. Each one removed with slow, gentle care and placed into a metal dish that soon fills with small horrors. Dr. Roberts doesn't speak as he works. Neither does Dr. Agnes. There's something sacred about this silence, as if they're not just removing foreign objects but uncovering the truth of a story no one had dared to write down. When the procedure is finished, Dr. Roberts peels off his gloves and tosses them into the biohazard bin. He washes his hands slowly, deliberately, like he's trying to cleanse more than just potential contamination. "This wasn't an accident," he says finally, his voice low and certain as gravity. Dr. Agnes nods, her face pale as fresh snow. "She didn't make a sound. Not even when we pulled the glass out." Dr. Roberts looks at Clara, still lying quietly on the exam table, and his expression fills with a mixture of professional concern and human heartbreak. "She's used to it," he murmurs. "That's the part that breaks me." Outside the exam room, Martha sits with her head in her hands while Lucy places a gentle palm on her shoulder. Words have failed them both. Language seems inadequate to bridge the gap between what they've witnessed and what they can comprehend. But Clara's hands have told a story that her voice couldn't speak. And finally, someone is listening. The surgical team prepares one of the minor operating rooms with the careful precision of people who understand that they're not just treating wounds, they're excavating buried truth. This procedure won't require full sedation, just mild anesthesia to dull the pain without drowning Clara's consciousness. She's too young for deeper drugs without unnecessary risk. But there's another reason Dr. Roberts chooses light sedation, and it disturbs him more than he cares to admit. Clara isn't showing signs of distress that would warrant heavy medication. She's not fighting, not crying, not displaying any of the normal fear responses he'd expect from a child facing surgery. That level of resignation in someone so young is deeply, profoundly wrong. Inside the sterile chamber, Clara lies on a cushioned table, her hands placed gently on soft surgical pads. She doesn't ask where she is or what's about to happen. Her eyes remain open but unseeing, fixed on fluorescent light fixtures that buzz softly in the ceiling like distant insects. Dr. Agnes adjusts the tray of surgical instruments while Dr. James Rogers, the anesthesiologist, monitors Clara's vital signs. He glances at the readings, then back at the child, his brow furrowing with confusion. "She's calm," he says, almost uncertain of his own words. "Too calm." Dr. Roberts nods without looking up from his preparations. "That's not calmness. That's dissociation. She's beyond fear, and that's not a good thing." They begin the procedure finger by finger, treating each wound like an archaeological dig site. The damaged areas are cleaned and carefully reopened under magnification. Each foreign object, glass shard, plastic sliver, metal fleck, is extracted one at a time with surgical tweezers that look more like precision jewelry tools. Some fragments have fused slightly with the healing skin around them, requiring delicate cutting that would normally make any child flinch, pull back, or cry out in pain. Clara does none of these things. Her body remains still as a sleeping cat, her chest rising and falling in slow, shallow movements that speak of someone who has learned to breathe around pain instead of fighting it. Even when a particularly embedded shard is extracted from beneath her ring finger, one so deep it had pressed into nerve clusters in the nail bed, Clara only blinks, as if her nervous system has forgotten how to register damage as something requiring attention. By the time the 12th and final object is removed, the surgical tray looks like evidence from a crime scene. The pieces vary in shape and material, but they all share one unnatural trait. None of them could have arrived under Clara's nails by accident. They were chosen, placed, and endured with the systematic precision of someone following instructions. When the procedure ends, Clara's hands are wrapped in clean, soft gauze that makes them look like they belong to a porcelain doll. The sedation is light enough that she stirs within 20 minutes, her eyes fluttering open like butterfly wings. She looks at her bandaged hands not with fear or relief, but with simple recognition, as if this is just another chapter in a story she's been reading for far too long. Dr. Agnes kneels beside the recovery bed, her voice gentle as summer rain. "Would you like some juice?" Clara gives the faintest shake of her head, a movement so small it barely disturbs the air around her. Dr. Roberts enters with a clipboard, settling into the chair beside her bed. His voice carries the careful balance of authority and compassion that comes from years of speaking truth to children who have been lied to by the adults meant to protect them. "Clara," he says softly, "we're finished. You did very well. Your hands are going to heal now. Slowly, but they will heal." Clara doesn't respond, but something in her posture shifts almost imperceptibly, like a door opening just a crack. "I have to ask you something," Dr. Roberts continues, "but you don't have to answer if you're not ready. Did someone ask you to do those things to your hands?" Clara's lips part slightly, then close again. Instead of speaking, she looks down at the gauze wrapped around her fingers. For the first time since Martha has known her, Clara's face changes. Her brows knit together, her chin trembles slightly, not from physical pain, but from something deeper. A memory surfacing, sharp and unwelcome, carrying the weight of terrible understanding. Dr. Roberts doesn't push. He rises quietly and exits the room, leaving Clara to sit with her thoughts and her newly bandaged hands. In the hallway, Martha stands with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, as if she's trying to hold herself together through sheer physical pressure. When Dr. Roberts emerges, she turns toward him, her eyes filled with something that lives in the space between grief and rage. "Well?" she asks, though she already knows the answer will change everything. He holds up Clara's chart like it contains the weight of the world. 12 foreign objects. Multiple types. Estimated to have been embedded across several weeks, possibly months. Some show signs of partial tissue absorption. There are infection markers, nerve stress indicators, and nearly complete pain desensitization in her response patterns. Martha stares at him, processing information that shouldn't exist in any universe where children are safe. And she didn't flinch? Not once. Not even once, Dr. Roberts confirms. Lucy, standing beside Martha, whispers, "What does that mean?" Dr. Roberts takes a breath like he's preparing to dive into deep, dark water. "It means she's conditioned. This wasn't impulsive self-harm or accidental injury. This was repetitive and systematic. Someone taught her this. Someone made her believe this was necessary." Martha's throat tightens until she can barely speak. So she was being punished? Or punishing herself? "Both," Dr. Roberts replies, his voice heavy as lead. "Because someone taught her that her pain was the price of someone else's safety." Silence settles between them like snow, muffling everything except the distant sounds of hospital life continuing around them. Then Martha speaks again, her voice unsteady but determined as steel. "We can't let her go back there. We can't let her return to that silence." "I'll file my complete report tonight," Dr. Roberts says, already making mental notes. "And I'll be recommending immediate intervention." Lucy nods, her jaw set with professional resolve. "I'll submit my medical findings to the county's Child Protection Office." Martha looks back through the small window in the exam room door. Clara sits upright now, sipping orange juice through a straw, her hands cradled carefully in their white wrappings. She looks older somehow, like the events of the day have shifted something fundamental inside her. Not broken her, but revealed just how much she's already survived. "I can't let her suffer another day in that house," Martha says, her voice soft but absolute. Dr. Roberts turns toward her, and in his eyes Martha sees the same fierce protectiveness that's been driving her since that first glimpse of Clara's wounded hands. "Then let's make sure she doesn't." The report prints in stark black and white, clinical language struggling to contain the human horror it describes. Alexander Parker sits alone in the Family Services office on the second floor of Chicago Children's Hospital, afternoon light filtering through the window beside him like weak tea. The fluorescent ceiling panels hum their electronic lullaby, but no amount of artificial light can chase away the chill that settled deep in his bones. Child, Clara Smith, age 7. Findings, 12 foreign objects embedded under fingernails. Additional notes: evidence of repeated intentional injury. Child displays psychological withdrawal and pain desensitization consistent with long-term systematic abuse. Alexander has seen similar reports before, enough to know what usually comes next. A tangle of family history thick as brambles. Evasive adults who speak in circles. Silence so dense it could drown the truth even when everyone secretly knows what's really happening. But there's something about this particular case that makes his skin crawl. The absence of rage in the child. The quietness of her pain. It's too measured, too deliberate, too carefully orchestrated. This isn't chaos masquerading as discipline. This is something far more insidious. He picks up his phone and dials a number he knows by heart. "Chief Carter," comes the answer on the other end. A voice that carries the authority of someone who spent decades protecting people from the monsters that hide in plain sight. "David," Alexander says, "I need your help. I have a case that won't wait." Within the hour, Chief Carter arrives at the hospital. Tall, broad-shouldered, a veteran of community policing who carries his experience like invisible armor. He's seen enough darkness to recognize it from a distance, and the tension in Alexander's voice told him everything he needed to know about the urgency of this meeting. They convene in a small conference room where Martha and Lucy wait, both looking like they've aged years in the span of a single day. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief, making the shadows under their eyes look deeper, the worry lines more pronounced. Alexander spreads Clara's file across the table like he's laying out evidence at a crime scene. "She's not just being neglected," he begins, his voice steady as bedrock. "She's being systematically conditioned to accept pain as normal. Worse than normal, as deserved." David's expression darkens as he scans the medical photographs. "And the mother?" "Isabel Smith," Martha says, her voice tight as piano wire. "She's closed off. Cold." Every attempt to discuss Clara's behavior gets brushed aside like dust. She claims Clara is just sensitive, but she never reacts when we raise legitimate concerns. It's like she's built walls around herself so high that Clara's pain can't reach her. "She's evasive," Lucy adds, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Detached." And Clara flinches every time her mother touches her. It's subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. David leans forward, his cop instincts already painting a picture. "Anyone else living in the household?" Martha hesitates, then speaks carefully, like she's handling explosive material. "There was a man. I saw him once, dropping Clara off at school. Unshaven, greasy clothes, drove this beat-up motorcycle that sounded like it was dying. Clara didn't call him anything, didn't speak to him at all. Just looked at him and climbed into the car like she was following orders." Alexander takes detailed notes, his pen moving across paper with sharp, decisive strokes. "That's something concrete we can work with." David nods grimly. "I'll run a check through residential records. If there's an adult male living in that home, we'll find him." By late afternoon, David returns with information that makes the room feel several degrees colder. He slides a manila folder across the table with the careful precision of someone handling contaminated evidence. Damian Phillips, 39 years old. Works as a mechanic when he feels like showing up. Lives at the same address as Isabel Smith. Has for about 8 months now. No formal guardianship over Clara. No legal relationship to the family whatsoever. He's essentially a stranger who's inserted himself into this child's life. Alexander doesn't flinch, but his jaw tightens imperceptibly. Criminal history. David opens the folder like he's opening Pandora's box. One charge of domestic violence back in 2016. Girlfriend at the time refused to testify, so the case got dismissed. Other than that, we've got a few bar fights, noise complaints, disturbing the peace. Nothing that stuck to him long enough to matter. "Nothing that stuck," Alexander repeats, his tone heavy with implication. "That's exactly the problem," David confirms. "Guys like this, they know how to walk the line. They know how to hurt people without leaving evidence that holds up in court. They prey on women with children because they know those mothers will do anything to keep their kids safe, even if it means sacrificing their own safety." Lucy glances at Martha, who has gone very still, her face pale as winter sky. "I think," Martha whispers, "we need to talk to someone who's seen him interact with Clara at home. Someone who might have witnessed things that we haven't." The old apartment building crouches at the end of Maple Street like a tired dog that's been kicked too many times. Its red brick facade is stained with decades of weather and neglect, moss creeping between the mortar like green veins carrying stories no one wants to hear. The walkway leading to the front door is cracked and uneven, weeds pushing through concrete in stubborn declaration that life persists even in the most damaged places. This is the kind of building where people live for years without speaking to their neighbors beyond the occasional nod. Where everyone minds their own business because minding someone else's business might reveal truths too uncomfortable to carry. Mrs. Mary Alvarez has occupied the downstairs unit for nearly 3 decades. She's watched generations cycle through these walls, single mothers trying to make ends meet, young couples full of hope and empty of money, retirees counting days like rosary beads. She remembers Clara's family moving in almost 2 years ago, though family might be too generous a term for what she's observed. What she remembers most clearly is how the building's atmosphere changed after they arrived. Not dramatically, nothing you could point to and say, there, that's the problem. Just a gradual shift, like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. A heaviness that settled into the walls and refused to leave. When Chief Carter and Alexander Parker knock on her door, she opens it slowly, peering through the security chain with eyes that have seen too much to trust easily. But when David shows his badge, her shoulders relax slightly, and she steps aside to let them enter. "You're here about the little girl," she says before they can introduce themselves properly. "It's not a question." Alexander nods, pulling out his notebook. "Yes, ma'am. Clara Smith." Mrs. Alvarez gestures for them to sit in her small living room, which smells of lavender candles and old photographs. The walls are covered with family pictures, graduations, weddings, grandchildren with gap-toothed smiles. All the milestones that mark a life well lived and deeply loved. "I've lived in this building long enough to know the difference between normal family noise and something else," she begins, her hands folded in her lap like she's about to deliver testimony. "Clara's always been quiet, unusually so for a child her age. But quiet isn't the same as invisible, and I notice things that others might miss." David leans forward slightly, his voice gentle but focused. "What kinds of things have you observed, Mrs. Alvarez?" She sighs, the sound carrying the weight of months of sleepless nights and moral wrestling matches. "Late-night crying. Not from the woman, Isabel, I think her name is. From Clara. Thin walls in these old buildings, you hear more than you want to. But it wasn't normal crying, you understand? It was muffled. Like she was trying not to make noise even when she was in pain." "Has anyone else been living with them?" Alexander asks, though he already suspects the answer. "A man," Mrs. Alvarez replies, her voice hardening. "Rough-looking. Greasy hair, works on motorcycles in the parking lot at all hours. Damien, I think. I heard Isabel shout his name once during one of their arguments. They fight, but then it gets quiet real fast. That kind of quiet that makes you check your locks and pray for morning." David's jaw tightens. "Have you ever seen him interact with Clara directly?" Mrs. Alvarez's expression darkens, and for a moment she looks older than her 73 years. "Once. I was coming up the stairs with groceries. These old knees don't move as fast as they used to. Clara was in the hallway, maybe 6 months ago. She'd dropped a carton of milk, and it had spilled everywhere. She wasn't crying, but you could see she was terrified." She pauses, gathering herself like someone preparing to relive a nightmare. "He came out of the apartment and saw the mess. Didn't say a word, just grabbed her by the arm and yanked her inside so hard her feet left the ground. Like she was a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong place." Alexander's pen stops moving across his notepad. "Did Isabel react to this?" Mrs. Alvarez shakes her head slowly, sadly. "She followed them inside like a ghost. Didn't intervene, didn't speak up, didn't even look at him. Just accepted it. Like it was normal for a grown man to handle a 6-year-old child like that." The room falls silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. David and Alexander exchange glances that communicate volumes without words. "Mrs. Alvarez," Alexander says carefully, "have you ever considered reporting what you've witnessed?" "I did call once," she admits, her voice heavy with regret. "About 4 months ago, after I heard Clara crying for 3 straight nights. But when the officer showed up, Isabel answered the door with this perfect smile, said everything was fine, the child was just going through a phase. Clara stood behind her the whole time, staring at the floor like she was reading scripture written in the carpet. Her voice drops to almost a whisper. I think she wanted someone to ask again. To look closer. But no one did. When they leave Mrs. Alvarez's apartment, the sun has begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the cracked sidewalk in long amber stripes. Alexander stops at the bottom of the stairs, pulling out his phone. We have enough to act, he says, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. David nods, already formulating a plan. We'll verify his workplace, then approach him directly. Sometimes the best way to get truth from someone like Damian Phillips is to catch him off guard, before he has time to construct his lies. The auto repair shop sits 5 blocks from Clara's apartment building like a monument to mechanical decay. Mike's Custom Motors, according to the rusted tin sign that swings from a single chain above the garage door. The sound of grinding metal and compressed air echoes from inside, punctuated by the occasional curse word that would make a sailor blush. They approach carefully, David's hand resting unconsciously near his service weapon, not because he expects violence, but because 20 years of police work has taught him that cornered animals often bite. Inside the garage, Damian Phillips crouches beneath a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, a wrench clutched in his grease-stained fist. Oil and grime streak his arms and shirt like war paint, and when he looks up at their approach, his expression hardens instantly from annoyance to something approaching hostility. Can I help you? He asks, though his tone suggests he'd rather help them find the exit. David steps forward, his badge catching the fluorescent light like a small star. Mr. Phillips. Chief David Carter, this is Mr. Parker from Child Protective Services. We'd like to ask you some questions. Damian doesn't move from his position beside the motorcycle. The wrench dangles from his hand like a metallic extension of his aggression. Questions about what? Clara Smith, Alexander replies, watching Damian's face carefully for micro-expressions that might reveal guilt or fear or recognition. We understand you live with her and her mother. She's not my kid, Damian says, rising slowly to his full height. I just crash there sometimes. Rent's cheap, and Isabel needed help with bills. David's eyes don't flinch from Damian's stare. We've received reports of concerning behavior. Signs of injury, fear, withdrawal. Neighbors have witnessed interactions that suggest, kids fall, Damian interrupts, wiping his hands on a greasy rag with movements that seem deliberately casual. Kids cry. Doesn't mean someone's beating on them. No, Alexander says quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who's seen through 1,000 lies. But 12 shards of glass and metal embedded under a 7-year-old's fingernails over several weeks? That's not something that just happens, Mr. Phillips. For just a moment, a heartbeat, maybe less, Damian's cocky facade cracks. His jaw clenches, his grip on the rag tightens, and something flickers behind his eyes that looks suspiciously like panic. Then he forces a laugh, short and humorless as winter rain. You people are being dramatic. That little freak probably did it to herself. She's weird, obsessed with her hands. Always picking at them, staring at them like they're gonna tell her the future or something. Her mom's told you she's got problems. David steps forward, his voice dropping to a tone that could freeze blood. Watch your language. She's 7 years old. And we have a witness, Alexander adds, pulling out his notepad like he's consulting biblical scripture, who saw you physically drag her into your apartment. No conversation, no explanation, no gentleness. Just violence. Damian's grin fades like smoke in wind, replaced by something cold and calculating. You might want to think carefully about what you say next, Alexander continues, his voice soft as silk and twice as sharp. Because we're not here for gossip or speculation. We're here to protect a child who's been systematically tortured. And right now, all evidence points directly at you. Damian looks between the two men, his posture rigid as a coiled spring. For the first time since they arrived, uncertainty flickers across his features like candlelight in a draught. And in that flicker, both David and Alexander see the truth written in bold letters across his face. He's not afraid of being accused. He's afraid that Clara has finally found her voice. The therapy room exists in a world of soft edges and gentle colors, painted the pale blue of morning sky just before dawn breaks completely. There are no sharp corners here, No clinical white coats, no antiseptic smells that might trigger memories of hospitals and hurt. Instead, the air carries the comforting scent of colored pencils, construction paper, and the indefinable essence of safety. Dr. Beth Anderson believes in the power of silence, not the oppressive quiet that suffocates truth, but the generous kind of space where a wounded child might begin to remember that they have a voice. She spent 15 years working with children whose injuries can't be seen in X-rays, whose bruises live in places medical equipment can't reach. She knows that pain, when buried deep enough and long enough, often surfaces not as words but as colors, shapes, symbols that speak louder than screaming. Today she waits by the low therapy table, having arranged her tools with the careful precision of an artist preparing to help someone paint their way back to themselves. A box of crayons, each point perfectly sharpened. A pad of thick, cream-colored paper that won't tear under the pressure of small, desperate hands. A plush rabbit with one ear slightly bent, not broken, just loved into a different shape. She doesn't sit behind an imposing desk or position herself as an authority figure. Instead, she simply exists in the room, calm and unthreatening as morning mist, waiting for Clara to decide what kind of connection feels safe. The door opens with barely a whisper. Clara enters, guided gently by Nurse Lucy, who offers an encouraging nod before stepping away like she's delivering something precious and fragile to exactly the right place. Clara's steps are cautious but steady, her hands still wrapped in soft white gauze that makes them look like small, wounded birds. Beth smiles, but she doesn't move forward or speak first. She's learned that the most powerful gift you can offer a traumatized child is the freedom to choose their own pace, their own level of engagement, their own path back to trust. "Hi, Clara," she says finally, her voice carrying the warmth of sunlight through windows. "This is a quiet room. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Sometimes we just sit. Sometimes we draw. Sometimes we play. That's all." Clara doesn't answer. She stands beside the table, her eyes flicking once toward the plush rabbit, then toward the window where afternoon light paints golden rectangles on the wooden floor. After what feels like an eternity but is probably only 30 seconds, she settles into the chair across from Beth. For several minutes, there's nothing but the comfortable silence of two people sharing space without demands or expectations. Beth picks up a green crayon and begins to draw on her own sheet of paper, not as a lesson or demonstration, but as a rhythm. A simple house takes shape under her hands, small and welcoming, with a square window and a door standing wide open. A crooked sun hovers above it all, radiating wavy lines of warmth. She draws slowly, meditatively, not because she's creating a masterpiece but because she's creating permission. Permission for Clara to pick up her own crayon. Permission to make marks on paper. Permission to let whatever lives inside her find its way into the light. When Beth finishes her simple drawing, she slides a fresh sheet of paper across the table toward Clara, along with a box of crayons. Then she says nothing more, just sits and breathes and exists in the gentle space they're sharing. Minutes pass like quiet prayers. Clara's bandaged fingers reach hesitantly toward the green crayon, her movements uncertain not because of her injuries but because it's been so long since she's been allowed to use her hands for anything creative, anything gentle, anything that might bring joy instead of pain. She begins to draw, and what emerges on the paper makes Beth's heart clench with recognition and sorrow. It's a hand, but not like the cartoon hands that smile from coloring books or the realistic hands that doctors draw in medical textbooks. This is Clara's hand, and at the tip of each finger, she draws small spikes like thorns or nails or tiny daggers. The fingers bleed red crayon strokes that drip downward, staining the palm in crimson rain. Beth watches quietly, not interrupting or analyzing, just witnessing. This is Clara's truth taking shape in wax and color, and it deserves to be seen, acknowledged, honored. When Clara finishes her drawing, she doesn't look up. She simply places the green crayon back in its designated spot with almost ritual precision. Beth waits a moment longer, then speaks in a voice soft as feathers. "That's a strong hand. It looks like it's been through a lot." Clara doesn't reply, but she doesn't stop drawing either. She reaches for the red crayon and adds more details. Drops of blood that seem to have stories of their own, shadows that suggest depth of pain Beth can only imagine. When the session ends, Clara stands and places her crayon back in the box with the careful attention of someone performing a sacred ceremony. She follows Lucy out without a word, but the drawing remains on the table like a message in a bottle finally reaching shore. That night, Beth places the drawing in a soft folder marked only with Clara's initials. In her clinical notes, she writes, "Patient displays clear signs of internalized trauma. Drawing demonstrates self-perception through lens of systematic harm. Symbols used suggest coercion, enforced silence, and profound guilt. Strong indication that physical injuries were not self-inflicted but were accepted as punishment. Recommend daily sessions. Trust may be possible, but will require consistent patience and gentle persistence." Beth stares at the drawing for a long time after Clara leaves. She's seen thousands of children's drawings over the years, some joyful, some sad, some angry. But this one haunts her. Not because it's disturbing, though it certainly is, but because it's so precise, so detailed, so clearly the work of someone who has become an expert in her own pain. The following sessions pass in a similar rhythm of quiet revelation. Clara arrives each morning, her hands still wrapped though the bandages grow thinner as her wounds begin to heal. She enters the therapy room without prompting now, settles into the same chair, and waits. She no longer stares out the window at some distant, unreachable place. Instead, she watches Beth, studying her with eyes that seem older than 7, wiser than childhood should allow. And she draws. Every day, a new page, a new variation on the same devastating theme. Hands, always hers, sometimes bleeding, sometimes pierced with thorns, sometimes with nails shaped like tiny knives. One shows a hand tied with invisible strings like a marionette. Another depicts fingers dissolving into shadow, as if pain has begun to erase her very existence. Beth never pushes for explanations. Instead, she asks questions that aren't really questions, gentle observations that might, if Clara chooses, become doorways to conversation. If that hand could talk, what would it say? Or, what does the red part mean to you? Or, what kinds of things does this hand remember? Sometimes Clara pauses when Beth speaks. Sometimes she blinks twice, as if processing language she's almost forgotten how to understand. But more often, she simply continues drawing, letting her crayons speak the words her voice can't yet form. On the 4th session, Beth introduces something new. She brings a small set of laminated photographs, neutral, carefully chosen images designed to act as emotional catalysts without being threatening. A child hugging a golden retriever. A man's hands holding a screwdriver. A door standing half open in a darkened hallway. They're standard tools in her therapeutic arsenal, meant to help children identify feelings and memories that might be too dangerous to approach directly. When Beth places the photos on the table between them, Clara doesn't react at first. Her fingers hover over the images like she's reading Braille, searching for something her eyes might miss. Then, slowly and deliberately, she taps the photograph of the man's hands holding the screwdriver. Not his face. Not the tool itself. Just the hands. She looks up at Beth with eyes that suddenly seem to hold entire galaxies of unspoken truth. Then she shakes her head in a movement so small it barely disturbs the air between them. "Not him," she whispers, her voice dry and unused as autumn leaves. "But like that." Beth remains perfectly still, every instinct screaming at her to lean forward, to grasp this moment of breakthrough, to pull more words from Clara's throat like drawing water from a well. Instead, she stays anchored in calm, professional presence. "Like that how?" she asks, her voice gentle as rain. Clara's shoulders rise and fall with the weight of carrying secrets too heavy for such small bones. "He gives me pieces," she says, barely audible as prayer. "Little ones. I have to put them in." The room seems to hold its breath. Even the building's ventilation system falls quiet, as if the very architecture understands that something sacred and terrible is being unveiled. "What kind of pieces?" Beth asks, though she already knows the answer will break her heart. "Glass. Plastic." Clara's voice is matter-of-fact, as if she's reciting a grocery list instead of describing systematic torture. "He said if I didn't do it, he would hit Mom." Beth feels her heartbeat slow to a crawl, each pulse echoing in her ears like distant thunder. She fights the instinct to reach across the table, to gather this broken child into her arms and promise that no one will ever hurt her again. Instead, she keeps her hands resting calmly on the table, palms up, a silent gesture of availability without demand. "You knew your mom would be hurt if you didn't do it?" Clara nods, the movement barely perceptible. "Just once, she tried to say no. She said I was too little, that it wasn't right. Her chin begins to tremble, not from physical pain but from the weight of memory. He hit her so hard she couldn't get up for a long time. After that, she said I should listen to him. She said if I was good, maybe he'd be nicer to her. So you decided to protect her, Beth says softly. I tried to be good, Clara whispers. But it still hurt. And he still got angry sometimes anyway. The words hang in the air between them like smoke from a house fire, visible evidence of destruction that can't be undone, only witnessed and acknowledged. After the session, Beth closes the door behind Clara with hands that shake like leaves in storm wind. She walks directly to the secure reporting station, requests an emergency file update, and completes a mandatory disclosure form that will set legal machinery into motion. Her summary is brief but devastating. Patient confirms long-term coercion into self-injury by adult male. Motive explicitly linked to protection of mother from physical violence. Language and emotional responses suggest complete normalization of systematic abuse as survival mechanism. Patient demonstrates extraordinary courage in protecting parent at cost of own safety. Recommend immediate protective custody and criminal investigation. She adds a handwritten note that she folds into the official file. This child chose to suffer in silence rather than watch her mother be beaten. There is no deeper form of love, and no greater need for justice. That evening, Beth meets with Dr. Roberts, Alexander Parker, and Chief Carter in the hospital's small administrative conference room. The space smells of stale coffee and the kind of exhaustion that comes from confronting human evil in its most calculated forms. She's confirming everything we feared, Alexander says after Beth shares Clara's revelations. And giving us details that make it clear this was systematic psychological manipulation combined with physical torture. She still won't say his name directly, Beth adds, but the profile matches perfectly. Adult male living in household, using threats against the mother to coerce compliance, escalating punishment patterns. This is textbook intimate partner violence expanded to include child abuse. Dr. Roberts exhales slowly, like he's releasing poison from his lungs. The medical evidence supports every word she's told you. The systematic nature of the injuries, the way they were inflicted, the child's conditioned response to pain, it all aligns. Never has to go back to that environment. She won't, Alexander says with quiet certainty. After tonight, Damian Phillips will be in custody, and Clara will be in protective care until we can determine whether her mother can be part of her future. Beth looks around the room at these adults who have collectively decided to stand between a child and her tormentors. She shouldn't have had to survive this alone, she says softly. No, Chief Carter replies. But now she doesn't have to. Later that same evening, as stars begin to pierce the darkening sky above Chicago, Clara sits at the small therapy table in her temporary placement facility. The session has ended, but she asked, through a glance rather than words, to stay a few minutes longer. Beth agreed, understanding that sometimes healing happens in the quiet moments after official therapy ends. Clara picks up a blue crayon and begins to draw something different. For the first time since Beth has known her, she's not drawing a hand marked by pain. Instead, she creates a simple house, not unlike the one Beth drew on their first day together. But this house has no walls, just a roof, and underneath it, two small figures sit side by side. They have no faces, but their hands are holding each other's, fingers intertwined in a gesture of connection rather than isolation. Underneath the drawing, in letters that wobble with the uncertainty of someone still learning to write, Clara adds a single sentence, "No one is hurting today." When Beth sees these words, tears she's been holding back for days finally spill over. Not tears of sadness, though there's certainly grief in them. These are tears of recognition, of hope, of understanding that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit finds ways to imagine safety, connection, healing. Clara looks up from her drawing and sees Beth's tears. For a moment, fear flickers across her face. Has she done something wrong? Has she caused more pain? But then Beth smiles through her tears and says, "That's the most beautiful house I've ever seen." And for the first time since anyone can remember, Clara Smith smiles back. The morning fog lifts like a curtain being drawn back, revealing a world that looks almost ordinary despite the extraordinary events about to unfold. Damian Phillips's garage glows with the sickly yellow light of fluorescent bulbs fighting against dawn. Tools lie scattered beside the Harley-Davidson he's been working on, oil stains marking the concrete floor like dark constellations mapping out a life of mechanical fixes and broken promises. Confusion, annoyance, recognition, and finally something that might be resignation or might be calculation. It's hard to tell with men like him, who've learned to wear masks so well they sometimes forget their own faces underneath. Damian Phillips, Chief Carter calls, his voice carrying the weight of official authority but none of the theatrical drama television would suggest. This is real life, where arrests happen in garages that smell of motor oil and broken dreams. You're under arrest for child endangerment, aggravated battery against a minor, and criminal coercion. Damian puts down the wrench slowly, like he's buying time to think of an escape route that doesn't exist. "What are you talking about?" he asks, though his words lack the conviction of genuine confusion. Alexander steps forward with the arrest warrant, placing it in Damian's greasy palm. "You know exactly what this is about. And you have the right to remain silent, though I suspect you'll have plenty to say once your lawyer explains how much evidence we have." Damian's knuckles whiten as he grips the paper, but he doesn't speak. Doesn't resist. Doesn't explode into the kind of violent rage that men like him often use as their final card when all other manipulations fail. Instead, he simply drops his head, tension leaving his shoulders like air slowly escaping a punctured tire. The ride to the station passes in silence. Damian sits rigid between two officers, his eyes filled not with fear. Men like him rarely fear consequences for their own actions, but with a kind of cold anger that seems directed at the universe for failing to protect his secrets. At the precinct, he's processed with the mechanical efficiency of a system that's handled thousands of predators just like him. Fingerprints, photographs, paperwork that reduces his crimes to checkboxes and case numbers. Through every step, his posture remains defiant, hands clenched into fists that speak of violence barely contained. In the interrogation room, Chief Carter and Alexander sit across from him at a metal table that's witnessed more confessions than either man cares to count. The fluorescent light overhead hums like a mechanical insect, casting harsh shadows that make everyone look guilty of something. "We have testimony," Chief Carter begins, his voice steady as bedrock. "Medical evidence. Witness statements. A neighbor who saw you drag a 7-year-old child into your apartment like she was property you owned." Damian's response is a sneer that reveals more about his character than hours of testimony ever could. "I didn't do anything that kid didn't do to herself. She's a freak. Manipulative little psychopath, just like her crazy mother." Alexander holds up Clara's file, thick with medical reports, therapy notes, and photographic evidence that would make hardened prosecutors reach for antacids. "The child told us you gave her fragments of glass and metal. Forced her to embed them under her own nails. She said you threatened to beat her mother if she didn't comply." "She's lying," Damian spits, but there's something hollow in his voice now. "Kids make stuff up. Especially weird ones like her. Her mother's told everyone she's got problems, that she hurts herself for attention." Chief Carter leans forward, and when he speaks, his voice carries the authority of someone who spent decades separating truth from deception. "You're going to have a chance to tell your side in court. But I want you to understand something. This investigation is just beginning. We're going to talk to every person who's ever seen you with that child. We're going to examine every piece of physical evidence. We're going to build a case so solid that no jury will have any doubt about what you did." Damian stares at him with eyes that burn with impotent rage. He says nothing, but his silence speaks volumes. This isn't the silence of innocence. This is the silence of someone who knows they've been caught and is calculating how much damage control might still be possible. Miles away, in the quiet safety of the Child Advocacy Center, Clara sits at the same small desk where she first held a crayon after her surgery. The room maintains its soft blue tranquility, but something fundamental has shifted in the atmosphere. For the first time since anyone can remember, Clara seems to be fully present in her own skin. She has asked Beth for paper and a blue pen, not crayons this time, but the more grown-up tool of someone ready to write words instead of just drawing pictures. Her request was made in a voice that's still whisper-soft but carries new undertones of determination. "Anything you want to write is yours to keep or share," Beth says gently, settling into her chair across the table. "No pressure, no requirements. Just space for whatever wants to come out." Clara bows her head over the blank paper, her pen hovering like a bird deciding where to land. When she finally begins to write, Her letters are careful and deliberate, each word chosen like she's building a bridge back to herself. "Dear Judge, my hands weren't bad before. I was trying to be good, but it still hurt. He made me do it so Mom wouldn't get hurt worse. I'm tired of being scared, but I'm not scared anymore. I think I'm brave now." She pauses, reading her own words as if seeing them for the first time. Then she adds one final line that makes Beth's eyes fill with tears of pride and recognition. "I want to tell the truth now." She folds the letter carefully and slips it into an envelope, addressing it in her careful child's printing to "The Judge Who Will Help Me." When she hands it to Beth, her eyes are clear and determined. "This is for court," she says simply. "So everyone will know." That afternoon, Alexander meets with Dr. Roberts, Beth, and Martha in the hospital's glass-walled conference room. The late sun slants through the windows, painting everything in golden light that seems to promise better days ahead. "We need witnesses for the preliminary hearing," Alexander explains, spreading legal documents across the table like a general planning a crucial battle. "Clara's letter is powerful, but we also need testimony from the professionals who've treated her, who've observed the systematic nature of the abuse." Dr. Roberts nods, his face grave but determined. "I'll provide the complete medical report. 12 foreign objects, evidence of repeated insertion, chronic infection patterns. The physical evidence alone tells a story that can't be explained away by accident or self-harm." Beth speaks next, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who's helped a child find her way back from hell. "I'm prepared to testify about the therapy sessions, the drawings, what Clara revealed about the coercion and threats. She didn't need to say his name. Her descriptions were detailed enough to paint a complete picture." Martha swallows hard before speaking, but her voice is steady. "I can testify about his presence at school pickup, the way Clara reacted to him, the fear I witnessed. And about Isabel's complete denial when I tried to discuss Clara's condition." Alexander looks around the room at these three people who've collectively saved a child's life through their refusal to look away from uncomfortable truth. "We'll request an emergency preliminary hearing. In the meantime, Damien is being held without bail pending trial. Isabel. Her situation is more complicated." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "She'll be required to attend court-ordered parental rehabilitation. Any contact with Clara will be supervised until we can determine whether she can be part of her daughter's future in a healthy way." The weight of those words settles over the room like snow. They all understand what's being said without being said. Isabel's love for Clara was real, but her fear of Damien was stronger. And sometimes, love that's been twisted by terror needs to be untangled very carefully before it can be trusted to protect a child again. That evening, a court clerk places Clara's letter into the official case file, sealing it with the kind of care usually reserved for precious documents. Within those childish scrawls lies the simple, devastating truth of what systematic cruelty looks like when it wears the mask of discipline. But more than that, it contains something rarer and more powerful: the voice of a survivor who has decided to trust the world with her pain. The courthouse on the morning of the preliminary hearing seems to pulse with nervous energy. It's early October, and autumn sunlight streams through tall windows, casting warm patterns across polished wooden benches that have witnessed thousands of attempts to balance justice with human frailty. The public gallery fills slowly, a mix of reporters, concerned community members, parents who recognize that Clara's story could be any child's story, and a small contingent of second graders from Lincoln Elementary wearing their school uniforms like tiny suits of armor. Inside the courtroom proper, the air hums with the kind of tension that comes before thunderstorms or verdicts. Damien Phillips sits at the defendant's table, slouched in a chair that seems too small to contain his resentment. His court-appointed attorney shuffles through papers with the mechanical efficiency of someone who's defended 100 men just like him, but his eyes carry the weariness of someone who knows what kind of evidence he's up against. Clara sits in the witness area with Beth beside her, their chairs positioned at the front where she can see everything but feel protected by proximity to someone she trusts. She wears a pale yellow dress that Martha helped her choose, the color of morning light, of hope, of new beginnings. Her hands, finally free of bandages, rest quietly in her lap. The scars are still visible, thin pink lines that tell stories no child should have to carry, but they're healing. Like Clara herself. Behind them, Martha and Alexander occupy the second row, their faces painted with the particular intensity of people who've invested their hearts in seeing justice done. Dr. Roberts sits nearby, a folder of medical exhibits balanced on his knees, each photograph and report a piece of evidence in a puzzle that reveals systematic cruelty disguised as discipline. When the judge enters, Judge Patricia Hendricks, a woman whose silver hair and gentle demeanor mask 30 years of experience with the worst humanity has to offer, the courtroom falls silent except for the whisper of fabric as everyone rises. "We are here," Judge Hendricks begins after settling into her bench, "for a preliminary hearing in the case of the state versus Damian Phillips, regarding charges of child endangerment, aggravated battery against a minor, and criminal coercion." She looks out over the courtroom, her eyes briefly meeting Clara's with an expression of such gentle authority that even from across the room, the child seems to straighten slightly in her chair. "Mr. Alexander, you may proceed with your opening statement." Alexander rises and approaches the podium with the measured steps of someone who understands that the next few minutes might determine whether a child spends the rest of her life believing that justice exists or that predators always win. "Your Honor," he begins, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach every corner of the room, "this case involves a 7-year-old child who endured months of systematic torture under the guidance of the accused. The evidence we will present today includes medical documentation of 12 foreign objects surgically removed from the victim's hands, psychological testimony regarding the coercive methods used to ensure compliance, and the victim's own testimony describing how she was forced to inflict pain on herself to protect her mother from violence." He turns slightly, gesturing toward the evidence table where Clara's drawings are displayed alongside medical photographs that make several spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats. Exhibit A. Medical report documenting 12 distinct foreign objects, glass, plastic, and metal fragments, removed from the victim's nail beds during emergency surgery on June 24, 2023. Expert testimony will show that these objects were embedded systematically over a period of months, causing chronic infection and nerve damage. Judge Hendricks examines the medical photographs with the careful attention of someone who's seen too much human cruelty to be shocked but not enough to become callous. Exhibit B. Psychological drawings produced during therapy sessions, depicting hands with thorns, spikes, and bleeding wounds. These images demonstrate the victim's internalized understanding of pain as normal and deserved. Alexander holds up Clara's letter, and his voice softens just slightly. Exhibit C. A letter written by the victim herself, addressed to this court, stating, "He made me do it so Mom wouldn't get hurt worse. I want to tell the truth now." A murmur ripples through the courtroom like wind through wheat. Even hardened court reporters pause in their typing, and several spectators lean forward as if proximity might help them better understand how such words could exist in a 7-year-old's vocabulary. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that these crimes were not impulsive acts of violence but calculated psychological manipulation designed to break a child's spirit while maintaining plausible deniability. The accused used the victim's love for her mother as a weapon, forcing her to choose between her own safety and her mother's protection." Alexander returns to his seat, and Judge Hendricks calls for the first witness. Dr. Roberts approaches the witness stand with the careful dignity of someone who spent his career speaking for children who can't speak for themselves. After being sworn in, he settles into the chair and opens Clara's medical file like he's handling sacred text. "Dr. Roberts," Alexander begins, "please describe your findings when Clara Smith was brought to your emergency department." Dr. Roberts's voice is steady, professional, but those who know him can hear the underlying current of controlled outrage. "Upon examination, we discovered 12 foreign objects embedded beneath the child's fingernails. The objects included glass fragments, plastic shards, and small metal pieces. Some had been in place long enough for tissue to begin growing around them. In your professional opinion, could these injuries have been accidental?" "Absolutely not. The systematic placement, the variety of materials, the fact that both hands were affected equally. This pattern is consistent with deliberate, repeated insertion over an extended period. And the child's response to the extraction procedure." Dr. Roberts pauses, and for a moment his professional composure cracks just slightly. "She showed no normal pain responses. No crying, no flinching, no attempts to pull away. This level of desensitization indicates prolonged conditioning to accept pain as normal." The courtroom is silent except for the soft scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her keyboard. Judge Hendricks takes careful notes, her expression growing more grave with each detail. Next, Beth takes the stand, carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone who's helped guide a child back from psychological hell. She describes Clara's therapy sessions, the drawings that revealed internal trauma, and most importantly, Clara's own words about the coercion she endured. The victim told you that the defendant gave her materials to embed in her own hands? Alexander asks. Yes. She said he gave her pieces, glass and plastic, and told her she had to put them under her nails. When I asked why, she said it was so her mother wouldn't get hurt anymore. Did she elaborate on this threat? Beth's voice remains steady, but her hands tremble slightly as she references her notes. She said her mother had tried to protect her once, had told the defendant that Clara was too little for such treatment. According to Clara, he responded by hitting her mother so severely that she couldn't get up for an extended period. After that incident, her mother encouraged Clara to comply with the defendant's demands. A woman in the gallery, a mother herself, judging by the small hand she's holding, covers her mouth to muffle a gasp. Even Judge Hendricks pauses in her note-taking, her pen hovering above the paper as if the words are too heavy to record. Martha testifies next about her observations at school, describing Clara's withdrawal, her fear responses, and the moment when Damien's presence at pickup made the child visibly recoil. Her voice shakes slightly when she describes trying to discuss her concerns with Isabel, only to be met with deflection and denial. The defendant was present during this conversation? Alexander asks. Not initially, but I saw him waiting by the car. When Miss Smith took Clara's hand to leave, the child flinched visibly. At the time, I thought it might be sensitivity to touch. Now I understand it was fear. Finally, the moment arrives that everyone has been both anticipating and dreading. Alexander calls Clara Smith to the witness stand. The courtroom seems to hold its collective breath as this small figure in her yellow dress walks toward the front of the room. She moves slowly but steadily, her scarred hands visible as she places one on the Bible and raises the other to take her oath. Her voice, when she speaks the words, "I do," is barely audible, but it carries across the silent space like a prayer. Judge Hendricks leans forward slightly, making her voice as gentle as morning mist. Clara, do you understand that you're here to tell the truth about what happened to you? Clara nods, then remembers to use words. Yes, ma'am. And do you understand that no one can hurt you for telling the truth here? For the first time, Clara looks directly at Damien, sitting 20 feet away at the defendant's table. He stares back at her with eyes that promise consequences, but Clara doesn't look away. Something fundamental has shifted in her since that first day in the therapy room. Fear hasn't disappeared entirely, but it no longer rules her. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Alexander approaches with the careful steps of someone walking on sacred ground. Clara, do you remember a man named Damien who lived with you and your mother? Yes. Did Damien ever ask you to do things that hurt you? Clara's voice grows slightly stronger, like she's finding her footing on unfamiliar terrain. He gave me pieces of glass and other sharp things. He said I had to put them under my nails or something bad would happen to my mom. Did you believe something bad would happen to your mom? Yes, because I saw him hit her once when she tried to stop him. She couldn't get up for a long time, and there was blood on her face. The courtroom is so quiet that the air conditioning system sounds like a hurricane. Several spectators are crying openly now, but Clara continues with a matter-of-fact tone of someone recounting grocery lists rather than systematic torture. Did putting the sharp things under your nails hurt? Yes. A lot. But Mom said if I was brave and did what he wanted, maybe he would be nicer to her. Clara, Alexander says, his voice carrying infinite gentleness, whose idea was it for you to hurt yourself this way? His. Damien's. He said little girls who didn't listen caused problems for their moms, and he didn't like problems. Judge Hendricks takes extensive notes during this testimony, occasionally glancing at Damien, whose expression has cycled from defiance to resignation to something approaching panic. His attorney looks like he's calculating the mathematical impossibility of defending against a child's simple, devastating honesty. When Alexander finishes his questions, Damien's lawyer approaches for cross-examination. But facing a 7-year-old who's just described months of systematic abuse with the calm clarity of a war correspondent, he finds himself in an impossible position. Any attempt to discredit her testimony would require attacking a child's credibility, and even the most hardened defense attorney recognizes political suicide when they see it. No questions, Your Honor, he says, returning to his seat with the deflated posture of someone who's just watched their case implode. Judge Hendricks looks at Clara with something that might be maternal pride mixed with professional admiration. Clara, you've been very brave today. You can return to your seat now. As Clara walks back to sit beside Beth, something extraordinary happens. The gallery, filled with strangers, court personnel, and community members, begins to applaud. Not loudly or dramatically, but with the quiet, respectful recognition of people who've just witnessed genuine courage in its purest form. Judge Hendricks doesn't stop the applause immediately. She understands that sometimes courtrooms need to acknowledge heroism when they see it. Finally, she calls for order and delivers her ruling. In light of the medical evidence, professional testimony, and the victim's own account, I find sufficient probable cause to proceed with all charges against the defendant. Mr. Phillips will be held without bail pending trial. She pauses, looking directly at Damien before continuing. I want to be absolutely clear. The evidence presented today describes systematic torture of a child. This court takes such crimes with the utmost seriousness. Then her attention turns to a figure who has remained silent throughout the proceedings. Isabel Smith, sitting in the back corner of the courtroom like a ghost haunting the edges of her own family's destruction. Ms. Smith, your attendance at all future proceedings is mandatory. You will participate in court-ordered parental rehabilitation, and any contact with the victim must be supervised until this court determines whether you can provide appropriate protection and care. The courtroom begins to empty slowly, people filing out with the careful quiet of those who've witnessed something that will stay with them long after they return to their normal lives. Reporters huddle together, comparing notes on a story that will challenge every assumption about childhood safety and adult responsibility. But in the front of the courtroom, a smaller drama plays out. Clara stands beside Beth, looking around at the emptying space with something that might be wonder. For the first time in her short life, adults have listened to her pain and responded with action rather than denial. Martha approaches them, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief and pride. You did it, sweetheart, she says softly. You told the truth, and everyone heard you. Clara looks up at this woman who first noticed her silence and refused to accept it as normal. Will he go away now? She asks. Yes, Alexander says, joining their small circle. He's going to prison, where he can't hurt you or anyone else. And Mom. Clara's voice carries a complexity of emotions that no 7-year-old should have to navigate. Love tangled with disappointment, hope wrestling with hard-earned caution. Your mom is going to get help learning how to protect you the way moms should, Beth explains. It might take some time, but we're going to work very hard to help her become the mother you deserve. That evening, as the courthouse empties and normal life resumes on the streets of Chicago, Clara sits in the temporary foster home that's become her safe harbor. She's drawing again, but tonight's picture is different from any she's created before. It's still a house, but this one has strong walls, bright windows, and a door that's firmly closed to danger. Inside the house, 2 figures sit at a table, one small, one larger, sharing what looks like a meal. They have faces now, these figures, and they're smiling. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that grows more confident with each letter, Clara writes, "This is my someday house. Everyone inside is safe." The first session of the court-ordered parental rehabilitation program takes place in a sun-flooded community center room that smells of fresh coffee and tentative hope. 8 folding chairs form a loose circle around a small table laden with tissues, water bottles, and the kind of simple refreshments that suggest healing happens better when people's basic needs are met. On the whiteboard at the front of the room, facilitator Rose Wilson has written in cheerful purple marker, "We're not perfect, we just have to try." It's the kind of optimistic simplicity that might seem naive to outsiders, but Rose has learned that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest truths. Isabel Smith sits near the back of the circle, her posture rigid as reinforced concrete, arms crossed tightly across her chest like she's holding her ribs together through sheer willpower. She wears the same beaten-looking coat she's worn to every court appearance, and her eyes stay trained on the exit door as if calculating escape routes. The weight of exhaustion hangs around her shoulders like a physical thing, the bone-deep tiredness of someone who's spent years walking on eggshells that always shatter anyway. The other women in the circle represent a cross-section of motherhood gone wrong, a teenage mom struggling with postpartum depression, an older woman whose anxiety turned her into a helicopter parent who forgot how to let her children breathe, a mother whose own childhood trauma made her see threats everywhere except in her own responses. Each carries her own catalog of regrets, her own collection of moments when fear overrode love. Rose begins with the gentle authority of someone who's been where these women are sitting. "This isn't about condemnation," she says, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who's learned to forgive herself for her own parenting failures. This is about reflection. About understanding how fear can dress itself up as love, and how love sometimes needs to learn new ways of expressing itself. The room settles into the kind of silence that comes before confessions, before admissions, before the hard work of looking at yourself in mirrors that don't lie. Rose doesn't rush to fill this quiet space. She understands that some truths need time to surface, like deep water fish that die if brought to the surface too quickly. Finally, the young mother with postpartum depression speaks up, her voice shaky but determined. She describes the fog of exhaustion and despair that made caring for her baby feel like drowning, how she'd sometimes leave her child crying in the crib while she sat outside the bedroom door, sobbing into her hands. Her story opens a valve, and gradually other women begin sharing their own experiences of maternal failure and guilt. Another mother describes growing up in a household where love was conditional on perfect behavior, and how she found herself recreating those same impossible standards for her own children. She talks about the day she realized her 8-year-old son was afraid to tell her about a bad grade because he'd learned that disappointment was dangerous territory in their home. Through it all, Isabel remains silent, her jaw set like she's grinding diamonds between her teeth. She watches the other women with a mixture of recognition and resistance, as if she's seeing her own reflection in a funhouse mirror, distorted but unmistakable. Rose turns her attention to the group as a whole. Who here has felt helpless when faced with their child's pain? Several hands rise tentatively. Rose's own hand goes up as well, a gesture of solidarity that reminds everyone that facilitators are human too. Helplessness, Rose continues, is one of the most dangerous emotions for a parent. When we feel powerless to protect our children, we sometimes make choices that feel like protection but actually create more harm. Isabel's hands clench more tightly around her coat sleeves. Something in Rose's words has found its target, but she's not ready to acknowledge the hit yet. After the session ends, the other mothers linger near the coffee table, offering each other phone numbers and tentative promises to check in during difficult moments. They've found something in shared confession, not absolution, perhaps, but the recognition that they're not alone in their struggles. Isabel waits until they've all left, then approaches Rose with the careful steps of someone walking toward the edge of a cliff. Is this? She begins, then stops, her voice catching on words that feel too dangerous to speak aloud. Is this about me being a bad mother? Rose responds with a gentle directness that comes from years of helping people confront truths they've been hiding from themselves. This is for anyone who's ready to examine their choices. It's your story to tell, Isabel. No one else can tell it for you. That night, Isabel sits alone in the efficiency apartment she's rented since Damien's arrest. The space is small and sparse, containing only the necessities of survival. A narrow bed, a kitchenette table, a single chair by the window. The court-ordered separation from Clara means she's living in a kind of limbo, suspended between her old life and whatever comes next. On the table lies Clara's letter, the one she wrote to the judge. Isabel has read it so many times the paper has gone soft at the folds, but the words haven't lost their power to stop her breath. He made me do it so Mom wouldn't get hurt worse. Her throat tightens as she reads that line again. All those months, she'd told herself that Clara's compliance with Damien's demands was proof that the child was resilient, adaptable, stronger than other kids. She'd wrapped her own cowardice in a story about Clara's unusual maturity, her ability to handle difficult situations that would break other children. But the truth, written in a 7-year-old's careful handwriting, strips away every comfortable lie. Clara hadn't been resilient. She'd been terrified. She'd endured systematic torture because she believed it was the price of keeping her mother safe. The tears, when they come, feel like they're being torn from somewhere deeper than sadness. They taste of shame and regret and the particular grief that comes from realizing you've failed the one person who depended on you most completely. Over the following weeks, Isabel becomes a different kind of student than she's ever been before. She attends every session, arriving early and staying late to ask Rose questions that reveal the depths of her self-examination. She speaks hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as the group becomes a safe harbor for admissions that would have been impossible to voice elsewhere. She talks about her own childhood, growing up with a mother who was emotionally distant and fearful, who taught her that women survive by being small, quiet, and accommodating. She describes how she'd vowed to be different with Clara but found herself repeating patterns she'd sworn to break. Most painfully, she begins to examine her relationship with Damien, how his initial charm had gradually given way to control, How his protection had morphed into possession, how her fear of being alone with a child had made her vulnerable to someone who promised security but delivered only more fear. "I told myself I was being practical," she admits during one session, her voice barely above a whisper. Single mothers struggle. Men like Damien seem to offer stability, even if the price was. She doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. Rose guides her through the painful process of recognizing how her own trauma had created blind spots that put Clara at risk. "When we're afraid," Rose explains, "we sometimes can't see clearly. We make decisions based on our fear rather than our love." "But I did love her," Isabel insists, her voice cracking. "I do love her." "I believe that," Rose replies gently. "But love that's mixed with fear sometimes looks different from the outside than it feels from the inside. Clara needed you to choose her safety over your own fear, and you weren't able to do that yet. The question now is whether you can learn to do it differently." During one particularly difficult session, Rose hands Isabel a blank piece of paper and a pen. "Write a letter to Clara," she suggests. "One you don't have to send. Just write what you need to say." Isabel stares at the paper for long minutes before her pen begins to move. The words come slowly, painfully, like extracting splinters from a wound. "My dear Clara, I am so sorry. I was afraid for both of us, and I thought I could handle it alone. I thought if I could just keep him happy, keep him calm, we would all be safe. But I was wrong. You were hurt because I didn't speak up when you needed me to speak up. You were hurt because I chose my fear over your protection. I promise you, no more silence. I will learn to be brave. I will learn to choose you first. I love you more than my fear. I will always love you more than my fear." She seals the letter in an envelope and holds it against her chest like a talisman. She doesn't send it. Clara isn't ready for contact yet, and Isabel understands that her daughter's healing can't be rushed by her mother's guilt. But writing those words feels like the first honest thing she's done in months. A week later, Rose arranges for Isabel's first supervised visit with Clara at the Child Advocacy Center. The meeting room is designed to feel comfortable rather than clinical. Soft lighting, child-sized furniture mixed with adult chairs, toys and books arranged on shelves like offerings to the possibility of renewed connection. Behind reinforced glass that allows observation but muffles sound, Clara sits quietly with her hands folded in her lap. Her hair is neatly braided, and she wears a sweater that actually fits properly. Small signs of care that make Isabel's heart clench with recognition of how many details she'd stopped noticing during the worst of her relationship with Damien. When Isabel enters the room, Clara looks up with eyes that are cautious but not hostile. There's a wariness there that no 7-year-old should possess, but also something else, a kind of strength that wasn't visible before. This is a child who has been heard, believed, protected. This is a child who has learned that her truth has power. "Hi, baby," Isabel says softly, settling into the chair across from Clara. Her hands shake slightly as she places them on the table, palms up, a gesture of openness she's learned in group therapy. "Hi, Mom," Clara replies, and though her voice is neutral, she doesn't look away. That simple eye contact feels like a small miracle. They sit in silence for a moment, mother and daughter separated by invisible walls built from months of fear and pain. Then Isabel speaks, her voice carrying the weight of everything she's learned about herself in recent weeks. "Clara, I need to tell you something important. What happened to you? What I let happen to you? That wasn't your fault. You were trying to protect me, but protecting me was never supposed to be your job. That was my job, and I failed at it." Clara blinks once, processing words she's probably dreamed of hearing but never expected to actually receive. "I was scared," Isabel continues, each word chosen carefully. "I was scared of being alone, scared of not being able to take care of us, scared of what might happen if Damien left. But being scared isn't an excuse for not protecting you. Nothing is an excuse for that." Something in Clara's posture shifts slightly, not quite relaxation, but a subtle softening around the edges. "Were you scared of him too?" she asks quietly. "Yes," Isabel admits, and the honesty in that single word seems to lighten the air in the room. "But I should have been more scared of what he was doing to you than I was of what he might do to me." Clara considers this, her young mind working to process complex emotions that most adults struggle to understand. "I was scared too," she says finally. "But I thought if I did what he wanted, maybe he would be nicer to you." "Oh, sweetheart," Isabel breathes, her eyes filling with tears she doesn't try to hide. "You were so brave. Too brave. Children shouldn't have to be that brave." For the first time since Isabel entered the room, Clara's composure cracks slightly. Her chin trembles. Not with fear, but with the relief of finally being seen clearly by the person whose opinion matters most. "I missed you," she whispers. "I missed you too," Isabel replies, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single day." They don't touch during this first visit. That kind of physical reconnection will take time and careful guidance. But they talk, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Isabel tells Clara about the group therapy sessions, about the things she's learning about herself. Clara describes her art therapy with Beth, the drawings that helped her find words for experiences she'd never been able to express. When the visit ends, Clara stands and looks directly at her mother. "Are you going to keep learning?" she asks. "Yes," Isabel promises. "For as long as it takes. However long it takes." Clara nods once, a gesture that seems to contain both acceptance and challenge. "Okay," she says simply. As Isabel walks out of the advocacy center, she passes a bulletin board covered with children's artwork. Among the colorful drawings, she spots one that makes her stop breathless. It's Clara's work. She recognizes the careful lines, the deliberate color choices. The drawing shows a simple house with warm yellow light spilling from its windows. In front of the house, two figures stand side by side, one tall, one small. They're not touching, but they're facing the same direction, looking towards something beyond the edge of the paper. At the bottom of the drawing, in Clara's improving handwriting, are the words, "Mom doesn't have to be afraid anymore." Isabel covers her mouth to muffle a sob that's equal parts grief and hope. Her daughter, who has every reason to give up on the possibility of family, is still drawing pictures that include both of them. Still believing that healing might be possible. It's not forgiveness yet. That will take time and consistent proof that the woman who failed to protect Clara has learned to become the mother Clara deserves. But it's something more precious than forgiveness. It's the possibility of a future built on truth instead of silence, on courage instead of fear. 3 months later, Isabel graduates from the parental rehabilitation program. At the small ceremony held in the same community center where she first learned to speak her truth, she stands before the group of women who've become her unexpected support system and reads from a letter she's written to herself. "I, Isabel Smith, promise to choose my daughter's safety over my own comfort. I promise to speak up when something is wrong, even if my voice shakes. I promise to teach Clara that love protects, love speaks up, love fights for what matters. I promise that her childhood will not be sacrificed to pay for my fears." Rose presents her with a certificate that she'll frame and hang in whatever home she and Clara eventually share, a reminder of the day she stopped being a victim and started becoming a protector. That afternoon, Isabel meets with Clara's social worker to discuss the next phase of their journey back to each other. The supervised visits will continue, but with increased frequency and duration. Family therapy sessions will begin, helping them navigate the complex process of rebuilding trust. And if all goes well, they'll begin having overnight visits in a few months. "This is going to be hard work," the social worker warns gently. "Healing from trauma isn't linear. There will be setbacks, difficult days, moments when progress feels impossible." "I know," Isabel replies, her voice steady with hard-won confidence. "But Clara taught me something important. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's scary. I'm ready to be that brave now." 6 months after Damian Phillips was sentenced to 15 years in prison, Clara Smith returns to Lincoln Elementary School. But she's not the same silent, withdrawn child who once sat frozen at the back of the classroom. This Clara walks through the front doors with her shoulders straight, her head up, and something that looks remarkably like confidence painting her features in warm light. Miss Martha is waiting by the classroom door, and when she sees Clara approaching, her face breaks into a smile that could power the entire school building. "Welcome back, sweetheart," she says, her voice rich with emotion. "We've missed you so much." Clara smiles back, not the hesitant, fearful expression she once offered to adults who seemed to expect something from her, but a genuine expression of joy that transforms her entire face. "I missed you too, Miss Martha. And I missed painting." The classroom itself has been subtly rearranged in Clara's absence. Her desk is no longer isolated in the back corner, but positioned in the middle of a cluster of tables where she's surrounded by classmates rather than hidden away. The bulletin board near the window displays a collection of artwork from various students, but there's a special section labeled Clara's Corner, where her therapeutic drawings from Beth's sessions are displayed with pride. As Clara settles into her new seat, she notices that Ana Rodriguez, one of the girls who had previously whispered about her weird behavior, has left a small folded note on her desk. Clara opens it carefully, revealing a child's drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, "I'm sorry I was mean. Want to be friends?" written in purple crayon. Clara looks up to find Anna watching nervously from across the table. Instead of the old Clara's silence or withdrawal, this new version offers a small nod and says, "Yes, I'd like that." During morning art time, Clara's first official class activity since returning, Martha announces that they'll be working on a collaborative mural depicting what makes us feel safe. Each child will contribute a section, and together they'll create something larger than any individual effort. Clara approaches her section of the wall with careful deliberation. She's learned so much about art during her therapy sessions with Beth, not just technique, but the power of images to tell stories, to heal wounds, to speak truths that words sometimes can't reach. Her contribution to the mural shows an open door surrounded by bright flowers. Light streams from the doorway in golden rays, and just visible inside the door's frame is the silhouette of a child with outstretched arms. At the bottom of her section, in careful lettering, she writes, "Safe is when someone listens." When Anna sees Clara's work, she asks quietly, "Can I paint some butterflies around your door? I think it needs butterflies." Clara considers this suggestion seriously, then nods. Butterflies would be perfect. They mean things can change and become beautiful. As the morning progresses, more classmates gravitate toward Clara's section of the mural. Not because they're drawn to drama or tragedy, but because there's something magnetic about a person who has survived darkness and emerged carrying light. They don't know the details of what Clara endured. Martha has been careful to protect her privacy while explaining her absence, but children have their own intuitive understanding of resilience. By lunchtime, Clara's simple open door has been surrounded by butterflies, flowers, smiling suns, and even a small rainbow contributed by Marcus, a boy who rarely participates in group projects but felt compelled to add something to this particular masterpiece. During recess, instead of remaining inside as she had during her darkest period, Clara ventures onto the playground. She doesn't join the more boisterous games immediately, but she accepts Anna's invitation to help collect interesting leaves for a science project. As they work together, their conversation flows with surprising ease. "Were you really sick?" Anna asks, not with the morbid curiosity children sometimes display, but with genuine concern. Clara considers how to answer this. She's learned from Beth that truth can be shared in age-appropriate ways, that she doesn't have to carry secrets anymore, but also doesn't have to share every detail of her pain. "I was hurt for a while," she says simply. "But I'm better now. I had really good doctors and teachers who helped me get better." Anna nods seriously, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "I'm glad you're better. I was worried about you when you weren't here." This simple admission, that someone noticed her absence, that someone worried, fills Clara with warmth she's still learning to recognize as belonging. For so long, invisibility had felt like safety. Now she's discovering that being seen by caring eyes feels even safer. After school, Clara walks to the car where Isabel waits in the pickup line. These supervised transitions are still part of their court-ordered arrangement, but they become less about legal compliance and more about rebuilding the rhythm of ordinary family life. "How was your first day back?" Isabel asks as Clara buckles her seatbelt. "Good," Clara replies, and there's genuine enthusiasm in her voice. "I made a door on the wall, and Anna made butterflies around it. And Marcus made a rainbow, even though he usually doesn't like art projects." Isabel listens to this recounting of normal childhood interactions with the kind of attention other parents might reserve for reports of miraculous events. Every ordinary moment of Clara's social development feels precious after months of wondering whether her daughter would ever trust the world enough to fully participate in it again. "Tell me about the door," Isabel says as they drive toward the family therapy session that's become a weekly cornerstone of their healing process. "It's an open door with light coming out," Clara explains. "Beth taught me that doors in my pictures used to be about keeping bad things out, but now they can be about letting good things in." Isabel's throat tightens with emotion, but she keeps her voice steady. "That sounds beautiful, sweetheart." At the family therapy office, Dr. Sarah Chen greets them with the warm professionalism that has made her their trusted guide through the complex terrain of rebuilding trust between a mother and daughter. The office is designed to feel more like a comfortable living room than a clinical space, with soft furniture, warm lighting, and toys that encourage play rather than formal interaction. "Clara, you look happy today," Dr. Chen observes as they settle into their usual seats. "How did it feel to be back at school?" "Different," Clara says thoughtfully. "Good different. People remembered me, but not in the scary way." Dr. Chen nods encouragingly. "What made it feel not scary?" Clara considers this question with the seriousness she brings to all discussions about her emotional landscape. "I think because now when people ask me questions, I can tell them true things that don't hurt to say." This insight, profound in its simplicity, represents months of therapeutic work. Clara has learned to distinguish between secrets that protected her from further harm and secrets that isolated her from help. She's discovered that some truths become less powerful when spoken aloud, while others, like her own strength and worth, grow stronger when shared. "And how did it feel to watch Clara at school pickup today?" Dr. Chen asks, turning to Isabel. "Proud," Isabel answers immediately. "And grateful. There was a moment when I saw her laughing with another little girl, and I realized, she's not just surviving anymore. She's thriving." Dr. Chen makes notes in her file, tracking the steady progress that sometimes feels glacial to the participants but represents remarkable healing when viewed from a professional perspective. "Isabel, you mentioned last week that you've been having some anxiety about the overnight visits we're planning. How are you feeling about that now?" Isabel's hands fold more tightly in her lap, a tell that both Dr. Chen and Clara have learned to recognize. "I want it so much it scares me," she admits. "What if I mess up? What if I don't know how to be the mother she needs?" Clara, who has been quietly coloring in a book during this exchange, looks up with an expression of surprising maturity. "Mom, you don't have to be perfect. Beth told me that healing families don't have to be perfect families. They just have to be honest families." The wisdom in these words, spoken by a child who has earned the right to define what family means, brings tears to both women's eyes. Dr. Chen smiles, recognizing one of those breakthrough moments that make her chosen profession feel like privilege rather than work. "Clara, that's very wise." "Isabel, what do you think about what Clara just said?" "I think," Isabel says slowly, wiping her eyes, "that my daughter has become one of my best teachers." The session continues with practical planning for their upcoming overnight visit, discussing routines, emergency contacts, ways to handle difficult moments if they arise. But the emotional foundation has been established. They're not trying to rebuild a perfect family. They're trying to build an honest one. 2 weeks later, Clara packs an overnight bag with the careful attention of someone who understands that this moment represents more than just a sleepover. She chooses her clothes deliberately. The yellow dress that makes her feel brave, pajamas with stars on them that remind her to dream, the small stuffed rabbit that Beth gave her as a graduation gift from intensive therapy. The apartment Isabel has rented for this new chapter of their lives is small but filled with intention. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every small detail has been chosen with Clara's comfort and safety in mind. There are child-proof locks on cabinets that contain anything potentially harmful, nightlights in every room to chase away the darkness that once held too many terrors, and photographs on the refrigerator showing their journey through family therapy, visual proof that healing is possible. Clara's room is painted the same soft blue as Beth's therapy office, with shelves for books and art supplies, a desk positioned by the window where morning light will encourage creativity rather than conceal pain. The bed is made with sheets covered in a pattern of open doors and blooming flowers, a design Clara chose herself from the catalog, saying it would help her remember that every new day is like walking through a door to something better. Their first evening together passes quietly but comfortably. They cook dinner together, nothing elaborate, just spaghetti and salad. But Clara helps measure ingredients and stir sauce with the focused attention of someone who's discovered that ordinary activities can be sacred when shared with people who truly see you. After dinner, they sit together on the small couch, Clara leaning against her mother's shoulder while Isabel reads aloud from a children's book about a little girl who learns to speak up for herself. The irony is not lost on either of them, but it doesn't feel heavy. Instead, it feels like confirmation that they're exactly where they need to be. At bedtime, Clara brushes her teeth and puts on her star-covered pajamas while Isabel arranges her stuffed animals on the pillow, a nightly ritual they're creating together. When Clara is settled under her covers, Isabel sits on the edge of the bed, just like mothers do in countless homes across the world. "Mom," Clara says softly in the darkness. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm not scared anymore. Not of going to sleep, not of waking up, not of tomorrow." Isabel's heart swells with an emotion too complex to name, gratitude mixed with grief for the time they lost, pride in Clara's resilience combined with determination to deserve the trust her daughter is offering. "I'm not scared anymore either," she replies truthfully. "And do you know why?" "Why?" "Because we learned how to tell each other the truth, even when it's hard. And as long as we keep doing that, we can handle whatever comes next." Clara considers this, then nods against her pillow. "Good night, Mom. I love you." "Good night, my brave girl. I love you too." As Clara drifts off to sleep, Isabel remains in the doorway for a few extra minutes, watching the gentle rise and fall of her daughter's breathing. This child who once carried pain too heavy for such small shoulders is now sleeping peacefully, her hands resting open and relaxed on top of the covers instead of hidden beneath them. The scars are still there, thin pink lines that will fade but never completely disappear. But they're no longer sources of shame or fear. They've become part of Clara's story, proof of what she survived and overcame. Like the butterfly's chrysalis, they mark not the end of something, but the beginning of transformation. In the months that follow, their life together develops the comfortable rhythms that define healthy families. Clara continues her weekly sessions with Beth, but they've evolved from crisis intervention to maintenance, helping a thriving child continue to process her experiences and develop emotional tools for navigating the world. Isabel completes her certification as a peer counselor, finding purpose in helping other mothers recognize and escape situations that put their children at risk. Her own experience, once a source of overwhelming shame, becomes a bridge toward healing for families who are walking the same difficult path she traveled. They attend Clara's school events together, art shows where Clara's door paintings draw admiring comments from parents who don't know their full significance, spring concerts where Clara's voice rises clear and strong in the children's choir, parent-teacher conferences where Martha reports that Clara has become not just a participant in classroom activities but a leader who helps other shy children find their voices. On weekends, they explore their city with the wonder of tourists in their own hometown. They visit museums where Clara studies the way famous artists used colors to express emotions, feed ducks in the park while discussing everything from school gossip to dreams about the future, browse bookstores where Clara has graduated from picture books to early chapter books about brave girls who saved the day. One Saturday afternoon, almost a year after Damian Phillips was sentenced, they're painting together at the kitchen table when Clara makes an announcement that stops Isabel's brush mid-stroke. "I want to write a letter," Clara says, not looking up from the flower she's creating in watercolors. "To other kids who might be scared like I was." Isabel sets down her brush carefully. "What would you want to tell them?" Clara pauses in her painting, considering the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I want to tell them that grown-ups are supposed to keep kids safe, and if that's not happening, it's not the kid's fault. And I want to tell them that if they tell someone what's happening, really tell someone, there are grown-ups who will listen and help." "That's a very important message," Isabel says gently. "How would you want to share it? Maybe Beth knows other kids who need to hear it. Or maybe we could put it somewhere that scared kids might see it." This conversation leads to Clara's first public advocacy work, a simple but powerful letter that gets published in the local newspaper and later shared by child protection organizations across the state. In it, she writes, "My name is Clara and I am 8 years old. I used to be very scared and I couldn't tell anyone why. A bad person was hurting me and said he would hurt my mom if I told. I thought I had to keep the secret to keep my mom safe. But secrets about being hurt are different from good surprises. Secrets about being hurt make things worse, not better. I want other kids to know that if someone is hurting you, it's not your fault. Even if they say it is. Even if they say something bad will happen if you tell. The really bad thing is not telling, because then no one can help you. I told some grown-ups what was happening and they helped me. Now I'm safe and happy. My mom is learning how to keep me safe, and we're a family again. It can happen for you too, but you have to tell someone. Tell a teacher, tell a doctor, tell another grown-up you trust. Keep telling until someone listens and helps. You are braver than you think you are. I know because I used to think I wasn't brave, but it turns out I was brave the whole time. You are too." The letter generates an overwhelming response, hundreds of calls to the local Child Protective Services hotline, Dozens of children finding the courage to speak up about their own situations, parents recognizing warning signs they'd previously overlooked. Clara's simple truth, shared without shame or dramatic flourish, becomes a beacon for other children lost in similar darkness. At the letter's publication party, a small gathering at the newspaper office,